The tie was silk, Italian, worth more than Gemma Santos made in a month, and her 5-year-old son had his fist wrapped around it like a lifeline, tugging the most dangerous man in New York down to his eye level. Leo! Gemma's tray of champagne flutes crashed to the floor, crystal shattering against marble in a cascade of glittering destruction. She lunged forward, her heart seizing in her chest, every nightmare she'd ever had about her son's inability to read social cues converging into this single, catastrophic moment. Leo, let go. Let go right now. But Leo wasn't listening. Leo never listened when he'd locked onto something, or someone, that captured his attention. His dark eyes, so much like his absent father's, were fixed on the man's face with an intensity that made Gemma's blood run cold. "Why do you have so much sad inside you?" Leo asked, his voice carrying in the sudden silence that had fallen over the ballroom. 200 guests, frozen mid-conversation, mid-laugh, mid-breath. "It's so big I can see it from all the way over there." He pointed toward the corner where Gemma had stationed him with his tablet and headphones, her desperate attempt at invisible childcare when her babysitter had canceled 3 hours before her shift. The corner was 30 feet away. 30 feet her son had crossed without hesitation, drawn by something only he could see. The man Leo had attached himself to didn't move. Luca Vitale. Gemma knew the name. Everyone in New York knew the name, even if they pretended not to. Head of the Vitale family, heir to an empire built on shadows and silence, the kind of man whose presence made rooms go quiet and powerful men find somewhere else to be. He was tall, dark-haired, dressed in a suit that cost more than Gemma's annual rent. His face could have been carved from marble, all sharp angles and controlled blankness, a mask so perfect it might as well have been painted on. But his eyes, fixed on Leo's face, held something Gemma couldn't name, something that looked almost like pain. Leo. She reached them, her voice shaking, her hands trembling as she tried to pry her son's fingers from the ruined tie. "I'm so sorry, sir. He has autism. He doesn't understand." "Don't." The word was soft, but it stopped her cold. Luca Vitale raised one hand, not touching her, simply halting her in place. "Let him finish." Gemma's mouth opened, closed. She looked at her son, who was studying the man's face with the particular focus he reserved for puzzles he was determined to solve. "You're sad about a boy," Leo announced. "A little boy. I can see him." He pressed one small hand to Luca's chest, right over his heart. "He's in here. You carry him everywhere." The silence in the ballroom had become absolute. Gemma could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the distant clink of ice in someone's abandoned glass. 200 people watching a 5-year-old dismantle the walls of a man who had never let anyone see him bleed. Luca Vitale's jaw tightened. A muscle twitched beneath his eye. "You're right," he said quietly, so quietly that only Gemma and Leo could hear. "There was a boy, a long time ago." "What was his name?" "Nico." The word came out rough, scraped raw. "His name was Nico." "That's a nice name." Leo nodded solemnly. "Do you miss him?" "Every day." "That's okay. Missing people means you love them." Leo released the tie and patted Luca's chest with the casual comfort of a child who had never learned to be afraid. "My mom misses my dad sometimes. I see the sad in her too. But she has me, so the sad doesn't win." "Do you have someone so the sad doesn't win?" Luca stared at him. The mask cracked. Just for a moment. Just long enough for Gemma to glimpse something vast and wounded beneath the surface. Then he blinked, and the walls rebuilt themselves, stone by careful stone. But something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted in the air between them. "No," Luca said. "I don't have someone." Leo frowned, as if this was the most offensive thing he'd ever heard. That's not good. Everyone needs someone, even the sad people. He turned to Gemma, his expression brightening. Mom, he needs someone. We should help him. Gemma wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Leo, sweetheart, we can't just... The boy is right. She looked up, startled. Luca Vitale was watching her now, those dark eyes moving over her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He's remarkably perceptive, he continued. Most adults can't see what he sees. Most adults don't want to. He's... Gemma swallowed hard. He's always been like that. He sees things other people miss. Feelings, mostly. He doesn't always understand them, but he sees them. A gift. Some days. She managed a shaky smile. Other days it's a challenge, like today. She glanced at the shattered champagne flutes, the ruined tie, the 200 witnesses to her professional destruction. I'm so sorry. I'll pay for the damage. The tie. The glasses. I'll work it off. However long it takes. Please don't. You think I care about the tie? Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe, though it looked rusty from disuse. You think I'm going to punish you because your son told me the truth? I think I'm about to lose my job, and this was the only agency that would work around my schedule, and if I can't work, I can't pay rent. And if I can't pay rent... She stopped, horrified at herself. She didn't dump her problems on strangers, especially not strangers who could destroy her with a phone call. But Leo was already tugging at Luca's hand, pulling his attention back. Are you a king? Leo asked. Everyone keeps looking at you like you're a king. No, not a king. Then what are you? The question hung in the air. Around them, the ballroom had begun to stir again, murmured conversations, careful glances, the slow resumption of a party that had briefly forgotten how to breathe. Luca Vitale looked at the small boy holding his hand, then at the woman standing beside him with terror and defiance warring in her eyes. Something passed across his face, a decision made, a path chosen. I'm someone who needs help, he said finally, and I think your mother might be exactly the person to provide it. Gemma's heart stuttered. What? My father is unwell. Dementia. He lives in his memories now, most of them painful. The nurses do their best, but he doesn't respond to them. His gaze dropped to Leo. He keeps asking for a boy who died 22 years ago, a boy about this one's age. Understanding dawned, cold and sharp. You want Leo to... I want you to consider a position. Live-in care, with accommodation for your son. Your job would be to help my father feel less alone, and perhaps... He paused, and for a moment the mask slipped again, revealing the exhausted, grieving man beneath. Perhaps to help me understand how to carry the sad without letting it win. Leo beamed. See, Mom? I told you he needed someone, and we're good at helping people. That's what you always say. Gemma looked at her son, with his big heart and his inability to see danger even when it was standing right in front of him. She looked at Luca Vitale, this man of shadows and silence who had just let a 5-year-old see his scars. She thought about rent, about the stack of bills on her kitchen table, about the exhaustion that had become her constant companion, and the fear that had taken up permanent residence in her chest. I'd need to meet your father first, she heard herself say, and Leo would need his own space. His routines are important. Of course. And I won't be... This isn't... She fumbled for words. I'm not available. For anything other than the job. Something shifted in his eyes. Understood. Then yes. The word came out before she could stop it, before she could list all the reasons this was insane. We'll come. We'll try. Leo threw his arms around Luca's legs in an impulsive hug that made every bodyguard in the room reach for their weapons. But Luca simply stood there, frozen, his hand hovering above Leo's head like he'd forgotten how touch worked. Then, slowly, carefully, he let his palm rest on the boy's dark curls, and Gemma watched something crack open in his face, something that looked, impossibly, like hope. The Vitale estate rose from the Long Island coastline like a fortress disguised as a home. Gemma pressed her face to the car window as they rolled through iron gates and up a winding drive lined with ancient oaks. The main house sprawled across the horizon, gray stone, climbing roses, windows that caught the morning light and scattered it like diamonds. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was so far removed from her two-bedroom apartment in Queens that she might as well have landed on another planet. Mom. Leo tugged at her sleeve, his nose pressed to his own window. That house is big enough for 100 people. Why does the sad man need so many rooms? I don't know, baby. Maybe he's filling them with all the sad, so he has somewhere to put it. Gemma's throat tightened. Her son had a way of saying things that cut straight to the bone, truths wrapped in innocence that left her breathless. The car stopped. A driver in a pressed suit opened their door, and Gemma stepped out on unsteady legs, clutching Leo's hand like a lifeline. Their suitcases, two battered things held together with duct tape and prayer, looked absurd next to the gleaming vehicles in the circular drive. Luca Vitale was waiting for them on the front steps. He looked different in daylight, without the armor of a ballroom and 200 watching eyes. Still imposing, still radiating the particular gravity of a man accustomed to power. But there were shadows under his eyes that she hadn't noticed before, and his tie was slightly crooked, as if he'd knotted it without checking a mirror. "You came," he said. "We said we would. People say many things." He descended the steps and stopped in front of Leo, crouching down to the boy's level with a care that seemed almost painful. "Hello again." "Hello, sad man." Leo studied him with that unnerving focus. "You look tired. Did you not sleep?" "Not much. No." "I don't sleep good sometimes either. Mom sings to me when that happens. She has a nice voice." Leo brightened. "She could sing to you too if you want." Gemma felt heat flood her cheeks. "Leo. Perhaps another time." Was that amusement in Luca's voice? It was hard to tell. His face gave nothing away. "Would you like to meet my father now? He's been asking about you." "He doesn't know us," Gemma said carefully. "How could he be asking about us?" Something flickered in Luca's expression. "He's been asking about a boy. For months. The nurses tell him there is no boy, and he becomes agitated, confused. When I told him this morning that a boy was coming to visit, he paused. He smiled. For the first time in over a year, he smiled." The east wing of the house had been converted into a self-contained apartment. Warm colors, soft lighting, nothing that could startle or confuse. Photos lined the walls, decades of Vitale history, frozen in silver frames. Gemma's eyes snagged on one as they passed. Two boys on a beach, the older one's arms slung around the younger's shoulders, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's frame. Luca and Nico. Before. Salvatore Vitale sat in a wheelchair by the window, a blanket draped over his legs despite the warmth of the room. He'd been a powerful man once. Gemma could see it in the breadth of his shoulders, the strong line of his jaw. But age and illness had whittled him down, leaving behind a fragile shell that trembled slightly as they entered. "Papa." Luca's voice softened in a way Gemma hadn't heard before. "I brought someone to meet you." Salvatore's eyes, clouded, distant, drifted toward them without recognition. He looked at Luca as if he were a stranger, then past him to Gemma, then finally down to Leo. And stopped. "Nico?" The word came out cracked, broken. Salvatore leaned forward in his chair, his hands reaching out with desperate hope. "Nico, is that you? They told me you were gone, but I knew I knew you'd come back. Gemma's heart shattered. She moved to pull Leo back, to protect him from the raw grief pouring from this broken old man, but her son was already stepping forward. I'm not Nico, Leo said gently, taking Salvatore's trembling hands in his small ones. I'm Leo, but I can be your friend if you want. I'm good at being friends. Salvatore stared at him, confusion warring with something deeper. Not Nico? No, but Nico sounds like he was really nice. Will you tell me about him? The room held its breath. Gemma saw Luca standing rigid by the door, his hands clenched at his sides, his face a mask of barely controlled anguish. He expected rejection, expected his father to retreat into confusion, into grief, into the fog that had swallowed him for months. Instead, Salvatore's face crumpled, then reformed into something almost peaceful. Nico was my sunshine, he said, his voice steadier than before. He had a laugh like bells ringing. He loved the ocean. He loved his brother. His eyes drifted to Luca, and for a moment, just a moment, clarity flickered there. Luca, my Luca, you brought me a boy. Yes, Papa. Luca's voice was barely a whisper. I brought you a boy. Good. Salvatore nodded, his attention returning to Leo. That's good. Boys need gardens to play in. Fresh air. Does this one like gardens? I love gardens, Leo said earnestly. Do you have butterflies? We have butterflies. And rabbits. Nico used to chase the rabbits. They talked for an hour. Leo sat at Salvatore's feet, listening with rapt attention to stories that looped and tangled and sometimes trailed off into nothing. He never corrected the old man, never grew impatient, never once let go of his hand. Gemma watched her son perform a miracle she didn't know how to name. When Salvatore finally drifted to sleep, still holding Leo's fingers, Gemma stepped out into the hallway and found Luca waiting for her. He wasn't wearing his mask anymore. The grief was right there on the surface, naked and devastating. He hasn't been that lucid in 8 months, he said hoarsely. He hasn't said my name in almost a year. Leo has a gift. I don't know how to explain it, but you don't need to explain it. I saw it. He took a shaky breath. Name your salary. Whatever you want. Whatever it takes to keep you here. This isn't about money. Then what is it about? Gemma looked at this man, this powerful, wounded, terrifying man, and saw the 12-year-old boy who had lost his brother and spent 2 decades trying to outrun the guilt. It's about helping, she said quietly. That's all Leo and I know how to do. Help people carry what they can't carry alone. Luca stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he extended his hand. Then welcome to our home, Gemma Santos. I hope you know what you're getting into. She took his hand. His grip was warm, firm, and sent a current through her that she absolutely refused to acknowledge. I never do, she said, but we manage anyway. The weeks that followed reshaped everything Gemma thought she understood about the world. She learned the rhythms of the Vitale estate the way a sailor learns the tides, which hallways to avoid during business meetings, which gardens were safe for Leo to explore, which staff members smiled with genuine warmth, and which wore their politeness like armor. She learned that Luca took his coffee black and his silence seriously, that he disappeared into his study for hours and emerged looking like he'd been fighting ghosts. She learned that Salvatore's good days were becoming more frequent, and that Leo was the reason why. Every morning her son would race through the halls to the east wing, bursting into Salvatore's room with the enthusiasm of a child visiting his favorite grandfather. They developed rituals: breakfast by the window, walks through the garden when Salvatore felt strong enough, long afternoons in the sunroom where the old man would tell stories and Leo would listen with his whole body. Tell me about the boats again, Leo would say. The ones your papa built. And Salvatore would light up, transported to a childhood in Sicily where fishing vessels dotted the harbor, and his father's hands were always rough with salt and rope. Sometimes he got confused. Sometimes he called Leo by his brother's name, or forgot what year it was, or trailed off mid-sentence into silence. But Leo never minded. He simply waited, patient as stone, until Salvatore found his way back. "Your son is extraordinary," Luca said one evening, finding Gemma on the terrace after Leo had gone to bed. The sun was setting over the water, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. "The doctors say my father's cognitive function has improved significantly. They don't understand it." "Leo doesn't either. He just knows that your father is lonely, and loneliness is something he understands." Gemma wrapped her arms around herself, watching the light fade. He spent the first 3 years of his life in a world that didn't make sense to him. Everything was too loud, too bright, too much. Being lonely in a crowd, he knows what that feels like. And you? Do you know what that feels like? The question caught her off guard. She turned to find Luca watching her with that intensity she'd never quite gotten used to, as if he could see past her surface to something underneath. "I'm a single mother who works catering shifts and can't afford therapy for my kid," she said carefully. "I know exactly what it feels like to be surrounded by people and completely alone." "You're not alone here. I'm the help. That's different." "Is it?" He moved closer, and Gemma's breath caught at the sudden proximity. "You eat dinner at my table. Your son has brought my father back from the dead. You—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "You see me, the way Leo does. Like I'm not just a name, a reputation, a list of sins too long to count. Everyone has sins. Not like mine. You'd be surprised." They stood in silence, the space between them charged with something Gemma didn't want to name. She should step back, should remember her place, the boundaries she'd drawn, the reasons this could never be anything more than a job. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was. "My brother drowned when I was 12, Luca said abruptly. "I was supposed to be watching him. My parents went to a dinner party, left me in charge. I was so proud, felt so grown up." His voice hardened with old grief. "Nico wanted to go to the beach. I said no. He went anyway, and I was too angry to follow him. By the time I realized he'd been gone too long." "Luca. They found him in the water. The current took him. He was 7 years old, and he died because I was too stubborn to watch him the way I'd promised." Gemma's heart cracked open. She thought of all the times she'd looked at this man and seen only the cold exterior, the dangerous reputation, the walls he'd built so high no one could climb them. She hadn't seen the boy underneath. The boy who'd been carrying a weight too heavy for anyone, let alone a child. "That wasn't your fault," she said quietly. "Everyone says that. Everyone is right. Then why do I still feel like I'm drowning?" He turned to face her, and the mask was gone, stripped away, leaving nothing but raw, bleeding truth. 22 years, Gemma. 22 years of trying to make up for one mistake. Building empires, protecting my family, becoming someone no one would dare threaten. And none of it brings him back. None of it makes my father look at me without seeing the son who let his brother die. Your father doesn't see that. He does. He just can't remember why anymore." Luca's laugh was bitter, broken. "Perhaps that's a mercy. The forgetting." Gemma reached out before she could stop herself, her hand finding his arm, her fingers pressing against the expensive fabric of his sleeve. He went still at the contact, as if he'd forgotten what touch felt like. "Leo doesn't see a killer or a failure when he looks at you," she said. "He sees someone carrying so much pain it's visible from across a room, and he wants to help, because that's who he is. That's who I raised him to be." She paused. "Maybe the question isn't how to make up for what happened. Maybe it's how to put it down long enough to live. Luca stared at her. In the dying light, his eyes looked almost gold, almost warm. And how does one do that? You let people in. You let them help carry it. She smiled, small and sad. Trust me, I'm an expert at carrying things alone. It doesn't work. He didn't respond. But when she turned to go inside, his hand caught hers. Just for a moment, just long enough to squeeze. It felt like a beginning. 3 days later, the beginning almost became an ending. Gemma was in the garden with Leo, watching him chase butterflies through the rose bushes, when the black cars pulled up the drive. 3 of them, sleek and silent, disgorging men in dark suits who moved with the particular confidence of people accustomed to violence. Leo. She kept her voice calm through sheer force of will. Come here, baby. Her son ran to her side, his small hand finding hers, his face tilted up with confusion. Who are those people, Mom? I don't know. Let's go inside. But they didn't make it inside. A man stepped into their path, tall, silver-haired, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty carved into every line. He looked at Gemma the way a collector might look at an insect pinned to a board. So you're the new pet, he said pleasantly, and this must be the magic boy everyone's been whispering about. Gemma pushed Leo behind her. Who are you? Dante Ferraro, I'm an old friend of the family. His smile widened, or perhaps more accurately, an old competitor. Luca and I have been dancing around each other for years, waiting to see who blinks first. His gaze dropped to Leo, and something predatory flickered there. I must say, I didn't expect him to find such an interesting weakness. We're not... Please. I've had people watching this estate for weeks. The Vitale heir spends every evening with the pretty maid and her special child. His father, the great Salvatore, terror of the eastern seaboard, now spends his days holding hands with a 5-year-old and talking about butterflies. Dante chuckled. It's almost sweet. It's also extremely useful. Stay away from my son. That depends entirely on Luca. Dante pulled a phone from his pocket and dialed. Let's see how much he's willing to pay to keep his new family safe, shall we? Gemma's blood ran cold. She clutched Leo tighter, her mind racing through options. Run, fight, scream. None of them would work. The men surrounding them were armed, alert, positioned to intercept any escape. She was trapped. And Leo was the bait. It's okay, Mom. Leo's voice was small but steady. He was looking at Dante with that uncanny focus, his head tilted to one side. The sad man is coming. I can feel him. Dante laughed. The sad man? That's what you call him? He's going to be really angry, Leo continued, as if Dante hadn't spoken. When he gets here, he's going to be the angriest he's ever been. He looked up at his mother, and for a moment, he seemed far older than his 5 years. But not at us. Never at us. Gemma didn't know whether to believe him, didn't know whether to hope. But she held her son close and waited for Luca Vitale to prove her son right. He came like a storm rolling off the ocean. Gemma heard him before she saw him. The screech of tires, the thunder of car doors, the sharp crack of commands issued in Italian. Dante's men shifted uneasily, hands drifting toward weapons, their confidence flickering like candles in a wind. Then Luca emerged from the house, and Gemma understood for the first time why people feared him. He moved with the controlled fury of a man who had spent decades learning to channel rage into precision. His face was carved from ice, his eyes black holes that swallowed light. Behind him came a wave of men, more than Dante had brought, better armed, better trained, fanning out across the garden with military efficiency. Dante, Luca's voice carried across the space between them, quiet and devastating. You're on my property. I was just introducing myself to your guests. Dante's smile didn't waver, but Gemma saw something flicker behind his eyes. Doubt. The first crack in his composure. Lovely woman. Charming boy. I can see why you've kept them so close. Let them go. I don't think I will. Not until we've had a conversation about territory, about the shipment you intercepted last month, about the respect you seem to have forgotten you owe me. Luca's gaze found Gemma's. In that brief moment of contact, she saw something that made her heart stutter. Not rage, not calculation, but fear. Real, human terror at the thought of losing what he'd only just found. Then his expression hardened, and he turned back to Dante. You want to talk about respect? He took a step forward. His men mirrored the movement, a tide advancing. You come to my home. You threaten a woman under my protection. You put your hands near a child. Another step. And you think I'm going to negotiate with you? I think you're going to do whatever it takes to keep them safe. Dante grabbed Gemma's arm, yanking her away from Leo, pulling her against him like a shield. Cold metal pressed against her temple, a gun she hadn't seen him draw. That's the thing about men like us, Luca. We always have leverage. Leo screamed. The sound cut through Gemma like a blade. Her son lunged forward, his small fists pounding against Dante's legs, his voice shredded with terror and rage. Let go of my mom. Let go. Let go. Let go. Control your brat, Dante snarled, kicking out at Leo. Something snapped inside Gemma. She didn't think. Didn't calculate. She simply moved, driving her elbow back into Dante's ribs, stomping down on his instep, twisting away from the gun with a desperate strength she didn't know she possessed. The weapon discharged, the shot going wide, shattering a garden statue into 1,000 pieces. Then she was falling. Leo was in her arms, and the world erupted into chaos. Gunfire exploded around them. Gemma threw herself over her son, pressing him into the grass, shielding his body with her own. She heard shouts, screams, the wet sounds of violence she didn't want to identify. She squeezed her eyes shut and held Leo tight, murmuring prayers and promises into his hair. It lasted an eternity. It lasted 30 seconds. Then silence fell, broken only by ragged breathing and the distant cry of startled birds. Gemma. She looked up. Luca stood over Dante Ferraro's crumpled body, blood on his knuckles, a gun in his hand. Around them, the garden had become a battlefield. Dante's men scattered across the grass, disarmed and restrained by Luca's soldiers. The smell of cordite hung heavy in the air. But Luca wasn't looking at his victory. He was looking at her. Are you hurt? His voice cracked on the words. Leo is Leo. We're okay. Gemma sat up slowly. Leo still clutched against her chest. Her son was shaking, his face buried in her neck, but he was breathing, whole, alive. We're okay. Luca dropped to his knees in front of them. The gun fell from his fingers, forgotten. His hands, those hands that had just dispensed violence with terrifying efficiency, reached for Leo with impossible gentleness. Little one. His voice was barely a whisper. Look at me, please. Leo's tear-streaked face emerged from Gemma's shoulder. He stared at Luca with those dark, knowing eyes, his lower lip trembling. You came, Leo said. I told Mom you would come. I will always come. Luca's hand cupped the boy's cheek, his thumb wiping away tears. Do you understand? Always. No matter what. I will never let anyone hurt you. Promise? I promise. Leo nodded solemnly. Then he reached out and wrapped his arms around Luca's neck, holding on with the desperate strength of a child who had finally found something solid in a world that had always felt like shifting sand. Luca froze. For a moment he looked utterly lost, a man who had forgotten how to accept comfort, how to be held, how to let himself need anyone. Then his arms came up, encircling both Leo and Gemma, pulling them against his chest like he could absorb them into himself and keep them safe forever. They stayed like that for a long time, the three of them tangled together in the ruins of the garden, while Luca's men quietly cleaned up the carnage around them. Later, after the doctors had checked Leo for injuries, after Salvatore had been reassured that his favorite boy was safe, after the estate had been locked down and the bodies removed, and the thousand small crises of aftermath had been managed, Luca found Gemma in the library. She was standing by the window watching the moon rise over the water, a glass of untouched whiskey in her hand. She'd showered, changed, scrubbed the memory of Dante's hands from her skin. But she couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop feeling the cold press of metal against her temple. "You should be sleeping," Luca said from the doorway. "So should you." "Sleep seems unlikely tonight." He crossed to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, far enough to give her space. "How is Leo?" "Finally down. He asked if you could come say goodnight, but I told him you were busy." "I'm never too busy for him." Luca paused. "Or for you." Gemma turned to face him. In the low light, with his walls down and his eyes soft, he looked almost like a different person. Not the Mafia boss, not the man who had just killed to protect them. Just Luca. Just the sad man her son had seen from across a crowded room. "You could have been killed," she said, "coming for us like that. If things had gone differently." "They didn't. But they could have. You risked everything for my family." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. "That's what you are, Gemma. You and Leo. I don't know when it happened. I don't know how. But somewhere between that ballroom and this moment, you became the thing I would burn the world to protect." "Luca, I love you." He said it simply, without fanfare, like stating an obvious truth. "I love your son. I love the way you look at me like I'm worth saving. I love that you see the sad and stay anyway." He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I know I have no right to ask for anything. I know what I am, what I've done. But if you could find it in yourself to stay, not as an employee, not as a guest, but as—" "Yes." He blinked. "You didn't let me finish." "I didn't need to." Gemma stepped closer, erasing the careful distance between them. "Yes, Luca, to whatever you're asking. Yes." He kissed her like a man who had been drowning and finally found air. His hands cradled her face, his mouth moving over hers with a tenderness that made her chest ache. She tasted salt, tears, though she couldn't tell whose, and felt something unlock inside her that she hadn't known was closed. This man, this impossible, dangerous, wounded man. He was hers now, and she was his, and nothing else mattered. When they finally broke apart, Luca pressed his forehead to hers, breathing hard. "Stay," he murmured against her lips. "Always," she promised. And she meant it with every broken, healing piece of her heart. 6 months later, on a morning bright with autumn gold, Leo Vitale Santos asked his mother a question that stopped her heart. "Mom, when Luca becomes my real dad, do I have to call him Dad? Or can I still call him the sad man sometimes? Because he's not as sad anymore, but I don't want him to forget that's how we met." Gemma set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. "What makes you think Luca is going to become your real dad, baby?" "Because he asked Grandpa Sal for permission yesterday." Leo said this with the casual certainty of a child who had never learned that some conversations were meant to be private. "I heard them talking. Luca said he wanted to marry you and adopt me, and Grandpa Sal cried, but the happy kind of crying, and then he said Nico would have loved having a nephew." The tears came before Gemma could stop them. Hot and sudden, spilling down her cheeks while her son watched with mild concern. "Those are happy tears, right?" Leo asked. "I'm still learning the difference." "The happiest?" she managed. "The very happiest." The proposal came that evening. in the garden where everything had almost ended and somehow began instead. Luca had strung lights through the rose arbor, their soft glow turning the autumn dusk into something from a fairy tale. Salvatore sat in his wheelchair nearby, more present than he'd been in years. Leo perched on his lap, pointing out constellations in the darkening sky, and Luca stood before Gemma with a velvet box in his hands and his heart in his eyes. "I had a speech prepared," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I wrote it down, revised it a dozen times, practiced it until I could say it without my voice breaking." A small, self-deprecating smile crossed his face. "I've forgotten every word." "Then don't use words." Gemma stepped closer, her hands finding his. "Just tell me what's in your heart." "You." The answer came instantly, without hesitation. "You're in my heart. You and Leo. You walked into my life because a little boy saw something no one else could see, and you stayed because—" He shook his head, wonder coloring his voice. "I still don't know why you stayed. I've given you every reason to run. You gave me a home. You gave my son a grandfather who adores him. You gave me—" Her voice cracked. "You gave me someone to carry the weight with. That's all I ever wanted, Luca. Someone who wouldn't make me do it alone. You'll never be alone again." He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the fairy lights and scattered them like stars. A deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds, antique and elegant. "This was my mother's. She left it with instructions that it should go to the woman who finally taught me that grief doesn't have to be a life sentence." He sank to one knee, and Gemma's breath caught. "Marry me, Gemma. Be my wife. Let me be Leo's father. Let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to carry anything alone again." "Yes." The word came out laughing, crying, everything at once. "Yes, yes. 1,000 times. Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her, patient and certain, across years and tragedy and the long, winding road that had brought them here. Then Leo's voice rang out across the garden. "Does this mean I get to be the ring bearer? Grandpa Sal says ring bearers are very important." Luca laughed, a real laugh, full and warm, the kind she'd only started hearing in the past few months. He rose and pulled Gemma into his arms, kissing her soundly while their son made exaggerated gagging noises and Salvatore clapped his weathered hands with delight. "Yes, little one," Luca called back, his arms still wrapped around Gemma. "You can be the ring bearer, the most important ring bearer in history. I'm going to need a special pillow, a fancy one, with gold tassels. Whatever you want." Gemma buried her face in Luca's chest, laughing and crying and feeling, for the first time in her life, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. They married in the spring, in the garden where roses bloomed and butterflies danced, and a little boy in a tiny tuxedo carried rings on a pillow with gold tassels. Salvatore walked Gemma down the aisle, his steps slow but steady, his mind clear enough to know exactly what he was doing and why. "Thank you," he whispered as he placed her hand in his son's, "for bringing the light back." "Thank you," she whispered back, "for raising a man worth staying for." That night, after the guests had gone, and Leo had fallen asleep clutching his ring-bearer pillow, and Salvatore had been tucked into bed with a smile still lingering on his face, Gemma stood on the terrace with her husband and watched the moon rise over the water. "Leo asked me something this morning," she said. "He wanted to know if he could still call you the sad man sometimes, so you don't forget how you met." Luca was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I'll never forget. But I'm not the sad man anymore, Gemma. I'm not carrying it alone." He pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "You taught me how to put it down. You and Leo. You taught me that grief can become gratitude, if you let the right people help you carry it. So what should he call you? Luca considered this. How about Dad? I think I'd like to be called Dad. Gemma smiled against his chest. I think he'd like that too. They stood together in the moonlight, the maid who had learned to stop running and the Mafia boss who had learned to stop hiding, bound by a love that had started with a little boy and a simple, devastating truth. Why do you have so much sad inside you? The sad was still there. It always would be. But it didn't win anymore, because now, finally, there were people to help carry it. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video as your support is essential for me to continue creating content like this.